Lieutenant Colonel Don Faith died leading his men through a Chinese ambush at the Chosin Reservoir. And for 75 years, history called them cowards for it. While the Marines who broke out of Chosin became legends, the 2,300 Army soldiers of Task Force Faith who fought in the exact same frozen hell got branded a disgrace. Historians spent decades burying their story in the archives. They said the Army broke. They said they ran. But the truth is that Don Faith died holding the line so his men could escape. He earned the Medal of Honor posthumously. His soldiers? They got erased. This is the true story of the forgotten men of Chosin. November 1950, the Korean War was supposed to be over by Christmas. Allied forces pushed deep into North Korea, winding their way up the narrow, treacherous mountain roads toward the Chosin Reservoir. The temperature was dropping fast, 30 degrees below zero. It was a cold so absolute it shattered steel and froze the blood in men's veins. On the east side of the reservoir, Task Force Faith was ordered to hold the line and protect the Marines' flank. They were dangerously exposed, spread thin across miles of frozen, rocky earth. And worst of all, intelligence told them the enemy was retreating. That was the deadliest lie of the war. Under the cover of heavy snow and absolute darkness, 80,000 Chinese soldiers had quietly slipped across the border. They didn't march on the roads. They moved like ghosts through the jagged mountain peaks, completely undetected by American planes. They surrounded the reservoir, trapping the Marines on the west side and Task Force Faith on the east. Then came the night of November 27th. The silence of the freezing darkness was suddenly shattered by the sound of bugles, whistles and cymbals echoing through the mountains. It was psychological warfare designed to terrify. Then the shadows began to move. Wave after wave of Chinese infantry charged down the snowy ridges, directly into the American lines. The ambush was absolute chaos. Task Force Faith was hit from every direction at once. In the freezing cold, their weapons malfunctioned. The lubricating oil in their M1 Garands froze solid. Men had to urinate on their rifles just to thaw the bolts so they could fire. Machine guns jammed. Artillery shells embedded in the deep snow without exploding. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned in a frozen nightmare, the men of Task Force Faith did not run. They locked bayonets and fought in brutal, point-blank, hand-to-hand combat in the pitch black. For 3 days and nights, they held the perimeter. They were completely cut off. No supplies, no reinforcements, no sleep. The wounded froze to death where they fell. Their original commander, Colonel McLean, was killed in the chaos. That's when 32-year-old Lieutenant Colonel Don Faith took command of the shattered remnants of the unit. Looking at his frozen, bleeding, starving men, he knew the grim reality. If they stayed, they would be annihilated. The only chance of survival was a desperate breakout to the south to reach the Marines. Faith organized a convoy. The trucks were loaded not with supplies, but with hundreds of heavily wounded men stacked on top of each other. The able-bodied soldiers formed a walking shield around them. On December 1st, they began their agonizing march down the narrow, ice-slicked mountain road. But the enemy was waiting. Less than a few miles into their journey, the convoy hit a massive Chinese roadblock at Hill 1221. The road was blocked by blown bridges and enemy machine gun nests, raking the ice with crossfire. The trucks were trapped. The wounded were being slaughtered in their vehicles. Desperate, the Americans called in a Marine Corsair for close air support. But the tragedy of Chosin wasn't over. In the chaotic, blinding snowstorm, the aircraft misidentified the target. A napalm canister dropped short, exploding directly into the front lines of Task Force Faith. Men were engulfed in liquid fire. The line began to buckle. The survivors were paralyzed by the horrific friendly fire. Seeing his men on the verge of total collapse, Lieutenant Colonel Don Faith drew his pistol. He stepped out from behind cover, rallied the terrified survivors, and charged directly up the icy slope into the teeth of the enemy machine guns. His men followed him into the slaughter. Faith was struck by shrapnel, mortally wounded. He died in the snow, but his charge temporarily broke the roadblock, allowing hundreds of men to escape the trap. Of the 2,300 men of Task Force Faith, only 385 able-bodied soldiers made it to the Marine lines. The rest were dead, captured or frozen. But instead of being hailed as heroes who protected the Marine flank, they were made the scapegoats of the Chosin disaster. It took 50 years of relentless digging by historians to uncover the truth. Task Force Faith didn't fail. They fought to the very last man in a frozen hell, and they deserve to be remembered.